Greetings, dear listener. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new scary stories and support me with a like. Enjoy listening.
For 2 now empty cups of strong black coffee, I still haven't warmed up. It's 1:15 on the clock. Why am I not sleeping? I'm afraid. Corny, I agree. And you don't have to say that I need to be treated for phobias, or that you yourself are brave in the dark like cats. I won't believe it. The mirror is only half a turn to the left, but these miserable 90 degrees are more difficult for me to overcome than drinking a glass of vinegar essence. And the gray streak that escapes from my hairstyle suggests that everything that happened may not be a dream at all. This Christmas night has become the most nightmarish in my life. Do you remember fortune-telling with a mirror? A girl should be left alone in a room with a mirror, in front of which there is a candle. I decided to try it out for myself. I conducted the ceremony at home. Since the apartment was left in my care, and only my cat remained of the living creatures, I allocated my bedroom for divination, where a mirrored wardrobe stands just opposite my bed. As it should be, I put a candle on, let down my hair. Stripping naked seemed to me superfluous, is not the kind of upbringing that would even show off in front of a mirror without clothes at home. In general, after waiting for midnight, I sat down in front of the candle, and looking at my reflection, I said several times, "Open my future to me." It was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard from my own lips, but I forced myself not to laugh. I stared at the reflection for a long time, trying to catch some sparkle in my eyes. My eyes eventually got tired, and in the uneven candlelight, everything swam a little. I even heard some kind of screeching, and it scared me, forcing me to finish the fortune-telling. When all the paraphernalia was removed, I decided to go to bed. Parents from the party could return home in the morning, or even stayed the night with friends. So I decided to lie down in the gym. My bedroom seemed a little uncomfortable to me now, and for some reason the mirror was especially confusing. Anyway, before going to bed, I closed the door to my room from the outside and made a bed on the couch. It was scary to fall asleep, but the cat came to me as usual, and his rumbling quickly put me to sleep, and I had a dream. As if I was sleeping on the couch, and the door to my room opens behind me, silently and easily. And I hear footsteps, creaking, creaking. On the wooden parquet, such heavy steps. My body is frozen. It's scary to move, and I want to close my eyes, but they are already closed, because it happens in a dream. And suddenly, there is a wheeze above me, and the next moment, icy hands close around my throat. Someone is strangling me, and I hear, "Bring back your youth. Give it back!" I can't breathe. My whole body is cramped. I have no strength to break free. Now the end will come, flashes in my head, and I finally wake up. I'm all wet. Cold sweat is running down my neck. I look around like crazy. My heart is pounding in my throat. The room is empty, and only my eyes are getting used to the darkness. I notice that the door to my bedroom is ajar. Then I got up, turned on the lights in the whole apartment, turned on the TV. The first channel I saw, turned it up. Fortunately, Christmas. None of their neighbors will be outraged. I went into my room and froze. The whole lighted room was reflected in the mirror. Only the girl who stood in my place had hair that was not dark brown at all. They were gray. I put my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. The reflection did the same. I was afraid to even approach the mirror, and my mind refused to believe what was happening. I slammed the door to the room and rushed to the phone. While I was dialing the number of my parents' friends, I could have sworn that I heard someone walking in the room. The long beeps for a minute increased my panic. I could literally feel someone's eyes on me. I rushed into the hall, where I almost killed myself on the floor, tripping over my fluffy pet, who was running right under my feet. Getting up and making sure that my arms and legs were intact, I looked around and was horrified. How many mirrored surfaces there were in the house. The stained glass windows, my mother's secretarial cabinet, the doors of the mezzanine. Everywhere I could see my scared face, and at some point I noticed that the reflection was changing. It began to wrinkle before my eyes. I screamed, and covering my face with my hands, ran into the kitchen, where there are no reflective surfaces. With shaking hands, she brewed coffee, keeping her face as far away from the water as possible. And even in the reflection of the poured drink, I could catch a glimpse that my double was no longer me at all. 2 o'clock in the morning. How much longer does it have to take for my madness to pass? I won't be able to sleep. I noticed something. There is a mirror hanging behind the kitchen cabinet door. While making coffee, I accidentally brushed against him, and the door opened a crack. Only some 90 degrees of rotation separate me from what is hiding there. I won't sleep. Now I'm going to put down my pen, pull my knees up to my chest, and wrap my arms tightly around them. I will sit and rock until dawn, humming some melody so as not to hear creaks and sounds from the room and the hall. And maybe if the parents do not return home too late, they will have time to find their daughter changed beyond recognition, but alive.
It was the coldest Christmas evening that has ever been remembered in a quiet town. The air was saturated with vile humidity, and snow, in large flakes, mercilessly covered everything around. The events of that night were the beginning of the story that I'm going to tell you now. In a small house on the outskirts of the town, there lived a lonely old lady named Emma. She spent all of Christmas without family or friends, and her heart, noticed by the many problems and losses in life, reflected a cold animal. But this year, everything was going to change. One day, the torrential rain stopped, and the sun even briefly peeked through Emma's window. A loud knock on the door caught her attention. She opened the door and found a huge gift decorated with a golden ribbon. The label read, "For Emma, from a friendly neighbour." Emma's heart woke up from hibernation, and she began to open the gift with interest. Inside was an antique book with a mysterious cover. The title on the cover was engraved in a foreign way and looked like,
It was a cold winter evening, when a fine snowfall created a magical atmosphere around. Ryan, a young and talented writer, decided to spend Christmas in seclusion to find inspiration for his new book. He rented a small house, lost among the pines, where no one could distract him from his work. On Christmas Eve, when it was completely dark outside, Ryan settled down by the fireplace and began to write. His fingers slid lightly over the keyboard, creating a story where the festive atmosphere turned into a nightmarish ordeal. Suddenly, he heard a soft knock on the door. Amazed that he hadn't expected anyone at such a late hour, Ryan walked slowly to the door. Inside, his heart was pounding with the uncertainty of who might appear in the dark. Suddenly, the door opened, and a strangely dressed man stood in front of him with snowflakes adorning his black coat. His cold eyes and creepy smile made Ryan feel uncomfortable inside. The man wished him a Merry Christmas and handed him a gift bag. Paradise.
The night before Christmas was typical for the small town of Middleton. Lost among dense forests and snow-capped hills, locals accepted gifts and enjoyed the flavors of festive dishes while waiting for the traditional midnight mass in the church of the town. However, something unusual and sinister lurked in the shadows. The first bell rang at the Tushino police station. Jonathan Whiteside, an experienced detective with years of experience, accepted the challenge and headed to a gloomy mansion on the outskirts of Middleton. The caller, old Elizabeth, was panting and terrified. She locked herself in her house, afraid to leave, after she heard heavy footsteps and inhuman laughter under the windows. When Jonathan arrived at the scene, he found that Elizabeth had handled the situation correctly. There were signs of violence and blood in the house, and the smell of dead flesh filled the air. But the strangest thing was that holy books and religious symbols were scattered all over the house. The room in which the hostess disappeared looked like a mystical altar combining Christmas.
In a small, forgotten town nestled deep within the snowy mountains, there existed a tale that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to speak its name. Legend had it that every Christmas, a maniac Santa Claus would emerge from the shadows, leaving a trail of terror in his wake. The tale began many decades ago, when an ordinary man named Nicholas Donner had taken on the role of Santa Claus for the town's annual festivities. As the years passed, Nicholas became consumed by the darkness that lurked within his heart. Over time, he transformed from a jolly bringer of gifts to an unrecognizable entity consumed by madness. It all started innocently enough. Parents began to notice presents in their children's stockings that were far from joyful. Toys would be rigged with sinister traps, causing harm instead of bringing joy. Parents who confronted Nicholas about this strange behavior were met with a twisted smile and crazed eyes filled with malevolence. But it wasn't until that fateful Christmas Eve that the true horror was unleashed. On that cold winter night, the moon shrouded by dense clouds, a boy named Timothy Baker was visited by the deranged Santa Claus. As the clock struck midnight, Nicholas Donner climbed down the chimney, his once vibrant red suit now tattered and stained. Timothy's parents, blissfully unaware of the impending danger, were in deep slumber. Nicholas approached Timothy's bedside, his eyes gleaming with cruelty as he lifted a rusty, blood-stained knife. With a sinister laugh, he pierced young Timothy's chest, snuffing out his innocent life. From that moment on, the town turned into a ghostly place every Christmas. Children and adults alike would go missing, their families left to weep and despair. The maniac Santa Claus would roam the streets, carrying a sack filled with the souls he had stolen, his echoing laughter joining the howling wind. Year after year, the town's residents lived in fear, locking themselves away in their homes, hoping to avoid crossing paths with the madman dressed as Santa Claus. The once festive Christmas spirit was replaced by an atmosphere of dread and sorrow, as the maniac Santa's presence cast a long dark shadow over the town. To this day, the legend of the maniac Santa Claus lingers, haunting the dreams of those who dare to remember. It serves as a chilling reminder that even the jolliest of figures can be twisted by darkness, and that the innocence of Christmas can be forever stained by the horrors that lie within the hearts of men.
Sam would never have gone outside in this weather if it hadn't been for one reason that made him do it. He forgot to buy presents because tomorrow is Christmas and his family was not small. His wife, Mrs. Jones, 2 children, the eldest daughter Isabel, 13 years old, and the youngest son Stuart, 4 years old, and mother, an elderly woman, Gabriella Jones. And so it was 11 o'clock at night, and Sam still couldn't find anything. He walked through the snow-covered, devastated streets in search of something special. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt that he would find it soon. He wanted to please his family with something unusual, special, because in his childhood this holiday was remembered as something fabulous, maybe even mystical, and he wanted to convey all this magical holiday atmosphere to his family so that everyone would get what they wanted and what they sincerely wished for. But the choice of a gift was not as simple as at first glance. He walked through the dark streets in search of a real Christmas miracle, but unfortunately almost all the shops were closed. The wet snow, as if not letting him pass ahead, blocked Sam's horizons. And then, in the shadow of a snow-covered tree, he saw something. This something was tall, thin, with glowing blue eyes. They looked like 2 lights that burned so brightly that this something could be seen even from afar. Then it came out of the shadows and our hero saw a familiar figure. Sam tensed up. He had heard about him more than once, but he had never seriously thought about meeting him. He could never even think that it could come true. They met each other's eyes and stood looking at each other for a couple of seconds. Sam stood rooted to the spot and did not know what to say. "Did you recognize me?" A gruff voice came from the shadows, but Sam was still standing. "I see that I have learned. I could not imagine how you have grown over the years." "Dad!" Not like Sam couldn't believe it. "You did. Well, it's been a long time. I saw you for the last time at the age of 6, but you haven't changed at all." Yes, son, I know, but now is not the time to just talk. And how is it there? It's quiet, peaceful, there's no fuss like yours. And there's also nothing there, absolute peace and quiet, as I wanted it to be. But now I miss my family, you, Gabriella. And the children of Isabel, the steward. Yes, I saw them. You have beautiful children, Sam. They look so much like you when you were a child. You haven't forgotten. Yes, I remember everything, every moment I spent with you, and even after death, I visit your house to make sure that everything is fine with you, although they do not let me go for a long time. Who are they? I don't have time to explain. I came to see you so that you know that I'm fine, and the best time to do this is, I thought, for Christmas. But I have to go, otherwise they will come for me. It's so sad that I can't even hug you goodbye, but it was nice to know that even after death someone needs me, so long as my boy. Goodbye, Dad. And then, abruptly, a very bright ray of light blinded Sam, and the phantom of his father disappeared without a trace. For a couple more minutes, he looked closely at the place where his father had just been in the hope of his appearance, but soon began to move on. After that, Sam never saw him again, but his soul was calm because he knew that everything was fine with Dad. Deep down, he considered himself abnormal and was afraid to tell anyone about his strange encounter, but it felt like a stone had been lifted from his shoulders. These are the miracles that happen on the night before Christmas.
Now my father is a deeply religious man, but he wasn't like that before. One day he told me the story of his conversion to God. This incident happened back in his student days. He was a brilliant student at a technical university, studied at the Faculty of Physics, and ridiculed everything that concerned the spiritual world. He studied very well, worked part-time, was successful with women, and had no bad habits. In short, he was an ordinary guy. At some point, he decided to study for independence and rented a room near the institute. He soon moved there from the dorm. The owners of the apartment were a young married couple. They were simple people, and my father quickly became friends with them. In addition, he did not bring a group of friends to his place and led a modest lifestyle. One day, returning home from the institute, he saw that the owners of the apartment had invited friends. It was Christmas Eve, and they decided to tell fortunes. Word by word, they invited my father to participate with them. Actually, he didn't believe in any of this, but it was inconvenient to refuse him. The owners did, and he decided to join them. They sat like that for quite a long time. Nothing special happened, and my father had already begun to slowly fall asleep. He apologized to the hosts and was about to go to his room when suddenly the guest stopped him. She gave him an unusual candle, apparently handmade, and said, "If you want to see your future bride, sit in front of the mirror. Do not turn on the light. Sit. Wait until you see her reflection in the mirror." Out of politeness, the father accepted the candle and hurried to bed. When my father came into the room, he decided to see what would happen. He turned off the light and sat down with a lit candle in front of the mirror. He sat for a long time, about 20 minutes, but it seemed like an eternity to him. He was about to put out the candle, cursing everyone for what they were worth. Suddenly, a small light lit up in the mirror. It grew and grew until it turned into a terrible red eye. Then a second light appeared. It also grew until it became a second ferocious eye. The father turned cold with horror. He hoped that he was dreaming all this, but he could not take his eyes off the terrible creature that began to appear in the mirror. After a few moments, the real devil appeared in front of him. My father screamed and ran out of the room into the kitchen. It took him a long time to come to his senses, and finally he was able to vaguely explain what exactly happened to him. The young woman explained to him that it was a vision of a spirit, and there was no need to run away from it. Now this spirit will haunt my father. If my father hadn't run out of the room, but waited until he left, then nothing would have happened. From that time on, the creature began to haunt the father. When he was at work or at the institute, everything was fine. But as soon as he returned home, he began to feel the presence of evil spirits nearby. And when he turned off the light, strange things began to happen at all. Books moved by themselves. Footsteps appeared. One night, my father woke up in a cold sweat. He couldn't figure out what the problem was. When he looked closely in the dark, he saw a woman in a long chiton sitting on a chair. My father couldn't believe his eyes. He even had to pinch his hand until it bled, but the woman not only did not disappear, she began to turn to him. That's when my father turned to God for the first time in his entire life. He asked for his help, and immediately after that, everything disappeared. A few days later, my father moved into the dorm. It never happened to him again. But since then, he has become a regular parishioner of the church, found a Christian wife, and raised his children as believers too. He always tells those who do not believe in anything spiritual that they should not be so categorical, because people can never vouch for what will happen to them tomorrow.
In a quiet and peaceful village, where every year the inhabitants gathered together to celebrate Christmas, a terrible and inexplicable murder occurred. Jenny, a generous and beloved woman, has always been distinguished by her love of the holiday. Her house was decorated with bright garlands. The Christmas tree sparkled with colorful lights, creating an atmosphere of joy and happiness. All the villagers were looking forward to her annual party. But this year, the party brought something terrible. When the hand of the clock pointed to midnight, the guests heard a piercing scream from the depths of Maria's house. They quickly ran inside to find out what had happened, and what they saw chilled their souls. Maria was lying lifeless on the floor with visible signs of violence. Her eyes reflected anxiety and horror. Everyone was trying to figure out who and why killed this innocent woman on Christmas night. Suspicion fell on every guest because each of them was present at the party. Traces of blood were found everywhere, but no other evidence. Everyone was shocked and filled with fear. Who would do such a terrible thing on a night full of love and joy? However, as the investigation continued, deep and dark secrets emerged from Maria. It turned out that she was hiding the dark sides of her life. Many found that they had quarrels with her that led to deep resentment and anger. No one expected that these disputes could escalate into something so terrible. Suspicion fell on Ben, the local master baker, who was always unhappy about his unpopular products and Maria's lack of attention. Some claimed they saw him hiding in her house before they heard the screams. But nothing concrete could be proved, and the true face of the killer remained hidden. The village was sealed off from the world for several weeks, while police and detectives held on to clues and clues. Despite all efforts, the obvious answer remained unknown. The village has only memories of Maria, the woman who turned the bright and joyful season into a real nightmare of Christmas night. Now every year, when the village gathers together to remember Maria, there is always a mute feeling of fear and uncertainty among them. And their brightest and happiest time of the year is completely overshadowed by the mysterious and terrible story of the murder at Christmas.
Everyone was asleep in the house. The children, Peter and his sister Marilka, in the nursery, Mom and Dad, in the bedroom, everyone's favorite dog Jack, in the hallway. The only thing that didn't sleep was the antique wall clock in Dad's office. They rhythmically tapped out all the seconds of the passing night, and at the beginning of each hour, they beat off a very beautiful fairy tale melody with metal bells. The antique clocks were sure that they were the most magical. And we can agree with this. After living as many years as they have lived, it is impossible not to become a wizard. The antique clocks knew about everything in the world, including magic, and were sure that a miracle would happen in their house that night. Meanwhile, it stopped snowing and there was even more silence. Not far from the house, a small ice rink was flooded in the yard. Children skated on it in the afternoon after lessons. Snowmen sculpted by children stood on guard at the edges of the rink. But now, on such a windless, quiet night, the rink seemed to be in no danger, and the snowmen slept, lightly snoring in their sleep with icy noses. Yesterday, after coming home from school, the children decorated the small Christmas trees growing along the path leading from the gate to the house with firecrackers and garlands. And that made their yard immediately prettier. He must have sensed the approach of Christmas. And everyone felt it. Mom and Dad, Peter, Mary, and even Jack. Of course, the snowmen standing guard at the ice rink were also waiting for Christmas, but they didn't tell anyone about it. And now, snoring and squeaking with pleasure, they had wonderful pre-Christmas dreams. And who is the wizard they dreamed about? Well, of course it was Santa Claus. Yes, yes, Christmas is the most wonderful holiday of the year. It brings joy to all who participate in it, even the antique wall clock. And they knew that Santa Claus was awake right now. He delivers gifts to children. And she can't forget about Peter and Mary who live in this house. And it was really like that. The most nimble and inquisitive dwarf. When Santa Claus's reindeer sleigh flew over the house, he saw a sparkling ice rink below and asked Santa Claus to come down to the ground to ride a little. Santa Claus knew that children lived in this house and therefore gave the task to the dwarf to bring gifts to them. And after that, the dwarf also dared to go for a little ride on the ice rink. He was so interested in skating on smooth ice that he quietly sang his favorite song and accidentally woke up the snowman. The snowman immediately recognized the gnome from Santa Claus and talked to him. You know, dwarf, our children, Peter and Marilka, dream of visiting Santa Claus for Christmas in Lapland. Of course, Santa Claus will definitely invite them to his place, said the dwarf, smiling cheerfully and ringing a small bell. Now he goes around all the houses where the children live and leaves them Christmas presents. On the way back, he will pick me up, and then I will ask him for invitation cards for a trip to Lapland for Christmas. It was getting light. Finally, the snowman heard the ringing of silver bells and saw in the distance Santa Claus's sleigh flying through the snow, pulled by handsome reindeer. And when the reindeer team drew level with the house, the little dwarf rang his bell. The sleigh stopped, and Santa Claus got out. The snowmen had never met him in their lives. They looked at Grandpa curiously, and Santa Claus was looking at them, smiling and stroking his long white beard. Good morning. How are you? He asked the snowman. Thanks. We're doing well. The weather is frosty and snowy, and we are glad that the most beautiful holiday of the year is approaching. Christmas, said the snowman. They looked up at the sky and saw the figures of divine angels there. But our children, Mary and Peter, dream of visiting you in Lapland. Do they dream? Santa Claus smiled. They will definitely visit me. He took out the invitation cards from his gift bag and gave them to the dwarf. The dwarf immediately ran into the house to put Santa's gift under the Christmas tree. Tell the children that I will be waiting for them at Christmas in Lapland. Let them come. I will show them the wonderful snow-white land, take a sleigh ride through the fabulous forest, and introduce them to the forest dwarves. And now it's time for us to get on the road. Come on, my little helpers, get in the sleigh. Santa Claus looked at the three dwarfs who, while he was talking with the snowman, had already managed to ride on the ice rink, but only when the fourth little gnome, who was running an errand for Santa Claus, ran out of the house and climbed into the sleigh, he pulled the reins